This tutorial will take you through drawing a cupcake and shading in the frosting to create that three-dimensional look of all of those ruffles and folds, as well as some of the little dots and sprinkles that are on top. The first step that I did was to create the sketch of the drawing, and for this I just looked at where all of the peaks of the cupcake were. So you can see on that white line where I'm kind of showing the peak is the highest point. Most times it'll be a light spot of the cupcake that just kind of shows where you see most of the lines, and that's where I'm going to start off with. After that, I went on to start building in my shading. And when you start to shade, the really important thing is that you're looking at all of those peaks and really seeing the value that is above and below that peak. So on this one, I looked at the value above was a little bit light, and also I started putting in that first sprinkle. And on those, the most important part is to make sure that you still have a shine in there. So you want to look for where the light parts are and include that shine within that dark value that you might create. So underneath that fold, the particular one that's shown, there was a dark value underneath, and on top it was lighter, and the actual crease or the peak itself was really, really white. So I left a space in between there so I could really see that peak and identify the fold of that frosting. It's very similar to fabric, the way you're going to draw it, just a little bit different. In the next few slides, you can kind of see me continuing on to work through, and I take each fold and each peak at a time, working on above and below and what shadows are created underneath. On this one, when you see that little sprinkle that I created, there's a little bit of a shadow behind it that you might want to include. So really look carefully. As you're drawing this, you might have to get up and look extremely close at the cupcake to see all of the details. And that's totally okay. I would recommend doing that. Here I've just worked a little bit more in and around each fold. On the area that's right below sort of the second sprinkle on the left, I guess I would say, you can see kind of an area where there's just a soft transition from light to medium to light again. So sometimes you'll have some areas in your cupcake that aren't going to be sharp edges where your values kind of end. There might be a smooth transition. In some of the creases, like the one I showed on this slide, you might have some areas that's really extremely light. So sometimes your crease isn't going to be a dark crease. It might be an area that is lighter than others. And you'll see it a little bit more on the next slide when you've seen the darker area that I've added. So I started to create some more darks underneath, but again, you can kind of go back and see where that crease in there is actually a light crease. As I've started to add the shadows below, you can see again how the actual crest of that frosting is white, and it has a little bit of value on either side. And then the shadows that I put underneath, extreme darks, and even on this cupcake that has frosting that's white, even if you're drawing things that are white, there are going to be really dark values and shadows to make those whites pop up and stick out a little bit more. In this slide, I started to add the actual cupcake part and shading down below. When you're shading, you can think about anything that is underneath or behind. It's going to be darker as it goes underneath. So where my cupcake goes underneath the frosting, it's darker because of a shadow that the frosting is casting. In this slide, I worked on the actual liner of the cupcake. And for the liner, I would just recommend that there are sort of peaks at the top, and then there's more of just kind of a curve or a bend down at the bottom. On the cupcake, You'll see in each little section there's going to be kind of a light side and a dark side, and it's all sort of kind of soft, fuzzy edges. I'm really just looking at the creases where it's darker and kind of the crest where it's a little bit lighter. This slide I'm just showing you the end. I went on and finished the sort of right side of the cupcake, and since that cupcake is white and the background is a lot darker, that is what is creating my dark edge. So when you're drawing the cupcake, really make sure that you don't have an outline around that white frosting, that it's going to be whatever's behind it that's going to create that edge. Most important things, like I said, are really just thinking about where that peak of the frosting is, looking at seeing if it's white with values on either side and kind of what values are on either side of it. Usually on the top it's going to be lighter, and underneath it's going to be darker. My suggestion is work one peak at a time and kind of work your way through it. That's the cupcake tutorial.